Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about some stuff in VUE. DEM, Digital Elevation Map. These things are relatively difficult to find exactly what you want. In this particular case, I have a map, sort of like Google Maps, and I can go in and double-click and zoom in on areas. And there's a number of things that you can just go ahead and turn off and get that text out of the way. And then you get sort of a nice little image here, and they come in various different forms. Just a simple information here, and then a map, a satellite sort of image. Well, for the purposes of playing around and coming up with this stuff, this I found was an easy way of going ahead and putting something together like that. Now, what you have to do is basically hit print screen and go ahead and put it in there, because it's not made for the purposes that I'm about to use it for. However, they do sell digital elevation maps which you can buy, so if you were planning on doing something for commercial use, often cases you can find yourself a grayscale digital elevation map from one of the various sites, and you just have to kind of search for DEM. But for our purposes here, just for testing and playing around, we're going to use this. Now, of course, because it's not meant for what I'm about to use it for, we have to play around with it. So what I've done already is I've done some for Madagascar here. So I've got the image, and I basically just did the different ones, print screen, paste it in here, just file new, and then paste directly into Photoshop. So I've also got this information here, and set that to normal. This one was derived from taking this simple one and just converting the blue and the gray into black and white. So let's see, we've got this guy right here, and it's representing a digital elevation model. It has some specific elements to it, and if we look through the different channels, you're going to find some that give you different information. So in this particular case, I took the green and the red channel independently, and I brought them in. So there's a green, slightly adjusted to using levels, and then I threw the red over top of it, but I set it to pin light. And what happens is that it really just kind of enhances a lot of the overall levels underneath. But then I lost all of this outer ridge here. So I copied the green channel back over top, and I set that one to lighten. So it basically brought in all the lightening areas. So you can see if I turn them both off, what happens is it just brought in some of the higher hill elements back to where I wanted them. And then using this guy, I basically set him to multiply to then flatten out everything else that I don't want to have affected in my map. So this basically becomes a little displacement map that I can use to make the Isle of Madagascar. Then of course I have my texture map, and then duplicate this guy and set it to normal, and press Control I, and this will be your opacity map. And in VUE, it's the inverse of what you normally expect to see from a lot of different, I guess, alpha channels, what you're accustomed to. It's the inverse of that. So let's go in, and I've done another one, which is Australia here. Let's get that together. So I'm just going to double click my main view so I can see it in here directly. And rather than a procedural train, people are dragging tables in the next room. Rather than a procedural train, I'm going to use a regular standard height field train. And of course, I'm way too close, so I'm just going to scroll backwards. Back. go. You can see it from a nice distance. I'm going to double click on the terrain. Just my left mouse button, double click. Part of my menu has gone outside of the screen. And that brings me in here. Of course, I've chosen a smaller screen space, so some of the stuff that is normally in here is missing. But it's okay, I don't need most of it. What I really need right now is to flatten this. So that basically gets rid of any sculpted information. Normally you'd be able to go ahead and use things like the different sculpting tools to go ahead and play with it, so 3D sculpt, raise, etc. And go ahead and sculpt detail on this, but I don't need to do that. What I do need to do is to import an image. So I'm going to go ahead and click this button, and it's going to bring up an import. So if I had an existing terrain, it would show up here, and the ability to load in a new image, displacement, can be loaded right here. And of course, just with the right mouse button, you can orb around in this window, just the same as right mouse button does the same thing over here. So you can move this around so you can preview it. And I'm going to go ahead and let's see. Just keep in mind that the little yellow arrow in view means to load something outside. And there we go. And I'm going to go ahead and forgotten to load in the image into here, so displacement. And this is what we get. So we see that we have a very high displacement going on here. If I were just to click preview, of course it would show me that in this view. Obviously it's way too high. So I can go ahead and reduce that just by bringing this down. And then preview that, see what it looks like. Now, I don't have quite enough resolution to do what I wanted to do. So a better idea may be to go back and redo that. So I'll just go ahead and redo it. Make sure I've divided it enough times. And then I can just simply go back and reload it. Say OK. And there we have it. And you can do additional modifications to it if you need to. But this will suit my purposes for now. So I'm just going to say OK. Of course, a quick render. Just want to see how that looks. So there it is with lighting, casting shadows, etc. So the next thing that I want to do is probably add a little bit of an ocean. So I'm going to get rid of the ground. Just delete that. Left click on the ocean. Create a nice little ocean there. And of course, this lovely ocean is all around, yet I still have this kind of ground plane thing going on here. So I need to get rid of this outside area. And this is where it gets down to start using the materials. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my terrain, up to my shader ball, Control, left click, which will bring up my material editor. And look like there's some stuff already on here, so I'm just going to keep the default material. And we'll go make sure that, I think it's world standard that it starts off with. I'm going to switch to object parametric so that it will use the UVs. I'm going to change to a mapped picture. And I'm going to go ahead and load my first of my textures. So I'll go ahead and load the color. And there we have it. And you can see it updating this view. So now it's there and it's got all the colors from the original texture directly on there matching up. I also have other requirements. As I said, I needed to cut out the outside around there. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to find myself my transparency. And I have a global transparency. And global transparency, as you change it, basically makes it transparent, which is what I want. And you see at 100%, it becomes fully transparent, i.e. wherever it's white will become transparent, and wherever it's black will be opaque. So we have these little lightning bolts beside there. If I click on the lightning bolt, it will give me a little dependency node. And the dependency node that it starts off with is a simple value, simply because that's what we start off with, is a simple numerical value. If I leave it highlighted and I move my mouse over to the left-hand panel, you'll see this thing that looks like sort of like a white stop sign. And this says replaced by texture map. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And I don't want a projected texture map, I want to use the UVs. So I'm going to go to texture map. And from there, you'll see that it gives me a UV coordinate node that's in there, and the shader node. I'm going to pull this over to the side there because the little yellow arrow is off the screen. I'm just going to click it so I can load. And I have my opacity map. And you can see right here, black area and white area. Say OK. So wherever it was white, it becomes transparent. And you see that plugs in right there. So I'm going to say OK. And OK. And click render. Ta-da! And now I have the wonderful land of Australia. Great, fantastic. So what else? Well, perhaps I wanted to go ahead and add additional procedural shaders into this, or maybe I want to add an ecosystem onto here, or maybe I want to get in a little bit closer and start dealing with the idea of ecosystems. Well, I can make some additional images that would help me with that. And if I look at the color map here, it gives me a big, bold, sort of green area. Well, that's great. If I look at the bold green area, let's load this up. And I go and look at the color map, look at its channels, look in the green area, blue area, red area. Different kinds of information are here. So the green area appears to be encompassing a fairly large overall region, including the area that I don't necessarily want. You can see that right here. So I want this region. Look at that. Not enough contrast. Here there's a fair bit of contrast, but it's inverted. And we have this also heavily inverted. So what I want to do is try and utilize this information as best as possible. So I'm going to grab this guy, paste. I'll go ahead and invert that information. Kind of starting point. And I'm just adjusting levels just to get those outer regions over there. I'll say OK. And then of course I have to cut it out. So here's my element for doing that. So I'm going to take that. And I go image, adjustments, desaturate, image, adjustments, levels. That. Set that to multiply. And all I'm left with is just those other regions. Now I'd like to go ahead and perhaps eliminate some areas. Don't want to go throw anything over there. And perhaps remove this small portion here. As the bottom, and just save that out. Control click, and right now what I need is another material in order to put an ecosystem on. But if I create another material, let's say, it doesn't really matter what I use because I'm actually going to get rid of it, but go ahead, throw some snow on there. Snow in Australia. It covers this entire area. Of course, you put it all the way up and it covers everything. Well, what I really want to do is I actually want to use this as an ecosystem, but I don't want the material. And in order to create an ecosystem, well, you basically have to create a new material. So I'm going to switch it into an ecosystem, and that's going to give me snow eco and snow. I'm just going to go ahead and delete the snow, leaving the ecosystem behind. Ecosystem, of course, I can go ahead and now load in a tree by clicking on the little tree icon. And wait and wait and wait. And what will I use here? How about this tree right here? Put him. Just double click him. Wait for him to load. Royal maple tree. Looks good. And I say, okay, well, I have a density variable here. If I went ahead and just populated right now, the entire thing is covered with trees. And actually those trees are massive, so I probably would need to change their scaling. So let's take their overall scale down, maybe to 0.1. Let's repopulate that. It's going to take a little bit longer because there's going to be a lot more trees. And thinking, and there we go. Let's cover them, all tiny little trees, all down in there. And the entire water is covered. So what I want is trees just to have in a specific area. So I'm going to go ahead and control that via the map. If I go to the density, I have an option for variable density. Click on that. I'm going to make sure, again, my mapping is set to object parametric, which will make sure it follows the entire surface. And then I'll control click on the shader ball. So there's my density. And again, I want to control it based on a map. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the little white stop sign there. Again, switch it to texture map, same as the last set of steps. And then of course load my map. So I'm just going to pull it out of the other window. Click the little yellow arrow to load the image. And load again. And I've got one tree, it's right there. Load it up, say OK, and then just repopulate. Take a moment. Say OK, and there's your trees. So let's render that off for a final look. That's not even a final render. We could do a final render, perhaps even get a better angle on this. And of course, making overall better textures, you can up-res this texture by using various different photographs and other elements. You can buy some high-res satellite images. There's places where you can get that stuff to get some really, really detailed areas and really recreate this as perfectly as possible. So if you had a really high-res digital elevation map, you'd get a lot more detail in these areas. And you could use these same general techniques to do an even better final version. So I'm just going to pause the video and set my render settings. Actually, I'll do the render settings right here. Render options. So I'll go to final, or we could go to even better than that, but final should be fine enough for what we want to see. I'll render to the screen. Let's do 800. And that should be good enough for what we want. I'll just go ahead and render. So there's our quick render, and you can see there's potential to add some more detail and other elements in here. the texture itself is not high enough res to be able to do that, but we could probably layer some stuff in here. Okay, so a little bit of behind the scenes work here. I've changed this to this by adding a simple kind of bump map. So what I did was I just went ahead, control click into my default, and went under bumps. Control click that. And within here, simply went in, grabbed my bump, and I created a procedural terrain. Now the procedural terrain, of course, is fine, but it doesn't do great unless you have something to multiply it by. So a multiplication node, and set to multiply by constant, which is typically what you get. Put that into position, send to here, and just change that number to maybe 128. It's a little bit different when you're putting it on the surface versus putting it as a sort of a bump map. So I wanted a really small scale information here, so that's why I'm using 128. And then of course you can control all the same kind of elements in there if you want to play with it. But I'm just leaving the defaults for now. Just going to say OK. And my bump is left at its default depth, which is 0.2. Lo and behold, some added detail. Another thing to do here, I'm just going to go ahead and turn on global radiosity just for an extra sweet touch, and then re-render. There you go, there's the final render. Still some stuff that could probably be tweaked. Atmospheric perspective could be quite a bit stronger. We could go ahead and put some cloud cover over top of that and break all that down. But that's a good starting point.